You good?
Yep, I'm good.
All right. So now for the main event. Roy Casagranda got a GED and a BS in political science and went on to teach high school calculus, algebra, history, physics, and chemistry. Eventually, he went back to school for a couple of graduate degrees, and now he teaches political science at a community college. Though he is obsessed with politics, he mostly hates it. And though he's obsessed with the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean, he mostly loves it. Roy is especially interested in telling stories from the perspective of the loser, the forgotten, the unjustly villainized, and women with weapons. So please welcome Roy Casagranda.
Before I start, I just want to say that if you like the cover to this and you want to have a cover like this made, Chris Kochek's company Gallant did this. And so far I've been getting nothing but rave reviews, so even if the content inside isn't great, the cover's amazing. All right, I guess I'm supposed to do a reading, so let me just do it and get that over with. It's chapter 4. It took another month, but Artemisia got her audience with Daria Vahu. She ran down the hall with Ariomardis and Artazastra. Father said it's a gift for your birthday, Ariomardis shouted after her. Atusa stood at the end of the hall, frowning, her arms folded, bringing the three to a walk. When they reached the Empress, she put her arm around Artemisia and walked them to the great colonnade hall. A group of men stood around the enthroned emperor. Atusa led them through the group. When they reached Daryavahu, the children bowed. Approach, Artemisia of Caria. She walked forward, nervous and excited. She wanted to lock her eyes on his. But this time she was too scared. Artemisia wanted to walk slowly, but felt her feet rushing. When she arrived, she bowed again. Artemisia of Caria, I've seen you train with your man. Do you wish to become an immortal? She knew that immortals were elite Persian soldiers, but nothing beyond that. Yes, Emperor. The courtiers laughed. Daryavahu raised a hand to silence them. He revealed no hint of mocking. I've watched you train. He treats you like I would an older boy. I've seen him hit you hard and work you until you almost collapse. Yet you persist. Artemisia gave no reply as pride filled her veins. She fought off an urge to smile and to rub a bruise on her arm. She avoided the former, but succumbed to the latter. And Democedes tells me that he's training you and my daughter to become physicians. Yes, Your Highness. My son, Ariomardis, tells me that you play with him some, but he laments that you spend most of your time with Artazastra, training and reading. He's a most excellent spy, Your Majesty. Artemisia felt betrayed, even though he revealed nothing worth hiding. You're most unusual. Daryavahu stroked his long beard. Your name is Persian, I think, but I don't recognize its meaning. Arta means great, but what does Mysia mean? Your Excellency, I was never told the meaning of my name, but now that you bring it to my attention, in Ephesus, the temple of Artemis refers to her as the great mother of nature. Perhaps that's its meaning. Have you been there? No, Your Majesty. You're 14, he asked. Today, you speak like a 24-year-old. The emperor remained very serious, and it made Artemisia feel important. Your interests are those of a man. In Persia, we have room for such women. You know the basis of our empire? No, Your Majesty. She thought that she might, but decided to err on the side of humility, tolerance, and inclusion. We conquer in war as surely as any military, but the conquered aren't enslaved and subjugated. They're made full members of the empire, entitled to all its benefits. The emperor clearly saw Artemisia's facial expression. Ah, the widows. That's a different matter. La Brunda attacked a member of the empire. They had to be punished. I understand the need to punish them, but I'm glad that you approve, Daryabahu smiled as the courtiers chuckled. You're an inspiration to my children. I want all to know the reward for ambition, so I'm granting you one wish. A wish? Artemisia asked, surprised. Anything you desire. Artemisia's mind raced. To go back to Caria, to become an immortal, to marry Khashayarsha. Gold, books, a fleet of ships, free the widows. Anything? If I can provide it, of course. I want you to order Atusa to submit to Democedes' surgery. The courtiers gasped. Atusa shouted, "Husband, you can't!" Daryabahu waved his hand, commanding silence. Your wish is to force the Empress to do a surgery that she has rejected? I believe she'll die without it and suffer so much. Daryabahu looked at the queen, then back to Artemisia. You could have asked for my favorite horse, the crown for my head, to return to Caria, or to become an immortal. But instead, you take the risk of upsetting the most powerful person in the imperial court. Artemisia went down to both knees and bowed her head. If I've done something wrong, please forgive me, my emperor. It was what was in my heart. He tugged on his false beard. If that was what was in your heart, then I must grant your wish. Empress Atusa sighed hard as she gave an empty mug to Artemisia. The 14-year-old poured wine from an amphora. It was heavy and difficult to balance, but it was the anticipation of what was coming that made her shake. Artemisia leaned against the wall. She knew that she had to be strong. Trying hard not to shake, she returned the cup to the queen. Khashayarsha sat on the sofa next to his mother, rubbed her back. Artemisia avoided eye contact with him, fearing it would open up a connaught. Democedes had ordered the Empress to stop drinking and eating the previous day. Thirst drove Atusa to drink greedily, but she clearly didn't enjoy it. Daryabahu came into the room. All save Khashayarsha, Atusa, and Artistone bowed or genuflected. The Emperor strode to the queen and hugged her and kissed her on the lips. All warriors must go into battle with a good dagger. He turned to a servant and took a scabbard with a golden hilt. It had 2 lion heads protruding from the pommel at right angles. The Emperor pulled the dagger and held it to the light. The blade was sharp and silver and covered in an avested text. The Emperor sheathed the dagger and offered it to the queen. Empress of Persia, daughter of Kuru and Casagranda, I've ordered you to perform a mission of great importance. I know you'll do your duty with the dedication required. She took the dagger and tilted her head down. Daryabahu bowed and backed out of the crowded room. People resumed their gossip about politics and the quality of seasonal food. Artemisia poured another mug of wine. She wondered how many the queen would need. Atusa had been quiet, but suddenly became animated. She turned to the princess. Have you tried this wine? No. I insist. She pushed the mug back to Artemisia. Artemisia filled it again, but Atusa refused it. You drink first. Artemisia took a sip. It burst with strong flavor of mulberries and pomegranates. It was thick, almost as thick as honey, nearly as sweet. I insisted that you assist Democedes. I know I would if I lived through this. I can't imagine we'll be on good terms. Artemisia nodded. Atusa took the mug and began gulping it down. Slurring, she said, "You're a little shit. In 3 months you think you're so close to us that you can make me do this? I don't care what you were thinking." Atusa shoved the empty mug back into the Carian's hand. Artemisia quickly poured another mug. Khashayarsha gave Artemisia heart-melting eyes. She understood them to be saying, "Forgive my mother." As the Empress fell deeper into a stupor, Artemisia wondered what she was saying or whom she was even saying it to. Khashayarsha winked as his mother leaned hard against his shoulder. He's 17, mature beyond his age, handsome, the heir to the greatest empire the world has ever seen. And he loves his mother. Atusa took another mug, but slowly her arm went limp. Artemisia had been dreading that moment. She didn't bother to catch the mug. Instead, she helped Khashayarsha put his mother onto her back, on the couch. Democedes examined the queen. He turned to Khashayarsha, "Your Excellency." The prince left, along with all the men, save Democedes. Artemisia watched as Artistone pulled the gown from the queen. Her servants took the clothing and brought in blankets. A pot of steaming water and a brazier with a red-hot iron were set at the end of the couch. Democedes took his dagger and set it into the hot water and then placed it on the blankets. He pulled the bandages from the ulcer, exposing a smaller new one. Servants rolled the queen over to put more blankets under her, and then, once she was in place, they tied her arms and legs down. "I want to go quickly. I want to finish before she awakens." Artemisia didn't know if she could keep her emotions at bay. Democedes brought Artemisia to the empress. "I'm going to cut off the left breast only. I'm going to cut the breast and the skin. I have to feel my way with the knife. I don't want to cut the muscle, but I won't be able to see it." He pulled out a cord. "I need you to hold the breast tightly so that I can secure the cord around the base. Then during the surgery, you're going to have to hold it in place so that I'm cutting a stable, something firm. You need to pay attention so that you're never in the way, so that I don't cut you." Artemisia nodded, but was overwhelmed and wondered if she could remember all he said. "Take hold of the queen's left breast." Artemisia, hands trembling, the Carian princess bumbled around, trying to figure out where to hold it. She didn't know what to take hold of, the ulcer, the nipple, or both. Democedes moved her hands into position he wanted. With her hand over the ulcer and the nipple, he said, "Now, squeeze." She did. He wrapped the cord around the breast and tightened and tightened. It started to turn purple. Artemisia squirmed. "How can she bear such pain?" "She gave birth to 4 sons, Democedes countered. "Are these truly equivalent?" Artemisia was on the verge of vowing to never get pregnant. "No, you're right, but women have a great capacity for pain. I've hit Myron hard on the cheek with a wooden sword. He didn't even wince. I think men have a great capacity for pain," Artazastra retorted. "That's not the same thing." Democedes finished tying off the breast. He turned to speak to Artazastra, but she fainted before he said anything. He looked at Artistone. "Your Majesty, please attend to your sister at the head. If she should awaken, I want you to comfort her." He handed her a leather strap. "She can bite on this." "Paramis, Your Highness, I want you to direct the handmaidens. They're to keep the area clean. When I'm done cutting the breast, I'll need you to bring me the hot iron." He waited for everyone to take their places. "Let's all take a breath." "Good, now exhale." When they had exhaled, he began cutting. The blood flowed immediately. Artemisia wobbled. She turned away, wondering if she was going to make it. The image of Artazastra's body laying half on the couch, half on the floor was strangely soothing. Then she looked back at the cut. It was deep and muscle was visible. It was shaped like a fan with the texture of steak. Blood filled the little troughs. Atusa moaned. Everyone turned to her. "Please don't wake up." She groaned and began to open her eyes. Artemisia began to cry. Atusa screamed in agony. Her sister offered her the leather strap. The queen bit into it and began to thrash under the binds. "I can't work like this. Handmaidens, lay on the queen. Hold her down, something." Even with the queen's thrashing under control, she still twisted her head from side to side. And then Artemisia noticed that the breast was in her hand. She wobbled and instinctively moved toward the door. Paramis bumped into her and pushed her against the wall to keep her from the brazier. A servant ran up to Artemisia and took the bloody breast. The young Carian crumpled. you hated that chapter and thought it was a bad selection, it was Babsh's fault. And it wasn't the whole chapter. All right, so I'm supposed to do Q&A. I think there's an obvious question, but...
I was just going to ask about pronunciation for...
I put a pronunciation guide on my website.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah,
great.
and I spoke into a microphone, so you can actually...
Fabulous.
You can hear it. Yeah.
Why the breast?
Oh, because that's what happened. This is historical fiction, but the reason I made it fiction instead of just history is because we don't know enough about Artemisia, so there was no way to make a biography. I had to fill in the gaps. There's just no story there. But one of the things that we know for sure is that Atusa did do a surgery for breast cancer, and this is 500 BC. So as you can imagine, like, that could not have been a pleasant process or experience. And Democritus really was the actual surgeon. I don't want to give away the story, but it's real. It actually happened. So that's why. It's worth pointing out that even though this is 500 BC, the ancient Egyptians were doing really advanced surgery even 1,000 years before this. We actually have treatises on brain surgery, which is hard for me to wrap my mind around. And we actually have mummies where after they had done the brain surgery, we actually have we see where the skull was removed, and the person lived afterwards because there's recalcification, and then you can measure the recalcification to see how many years they lived afterwards. And I know of one case where the person lived an extra 7 years. Now we don't know if they were like drooling the whole time and staring off into space, or they had a quality of life, but there's no brain to look at, so who knows what they did. But just the fact that they were doing it means that they were at least getting some success, otherwise they would probably stop.
How many names are actually historically like real and then, well not real, but like accurate, and then how many names are made up?
So like all the names in here, amazingly enough, that I just read to you were real people, and they were really part of the royal family. Later on when I get, there's later scenes that take place in Caria itself. I had a pretty big problem I had to surmount. So I knew Caria was carved up into kingdoms, and I had some of the names of some of the kings. But I didn't have enough of the names of the kings, so I actually started to have to make up to make the story work. I probably ended up making up about 2/3 of the kings, maybe even more, of Caria, just because I was trying to make sure I had enough material to do the story. But like Danos Ithimos is a real guy, and his dad really was Count Daulis. And for the most part, I tried really hard to stick to actual history. One of the problems I had was my main source is Herodotus. And Herodotus was a liar and biased. So, there's no other...
You're telling me the Ant-Men aren't real?
Yeah. So, there are scenes where there are things that he writes that obviously he must have even wondered about if they were right. And so that should cause some doubt. He says the dogs in Egypt, when they drink, they run as they're drinking, which is hard to imagine considering how dogs drink, so that they don't get eaten by the crocodiles, right? Because the Nile is just covered with crocodiles. And so if you were to stand still for even a second, snap, and you're gone. So there's a level of absurdity to Herodotus. But then there's times where he's clearly either making something up or he's misapplying it. So I'll give you, she's actually a character in here, but very brief, so I'm not giving any spoilers. Amistris, Herodotus blames Amistris of when she got married doing human sacrifice. So the Persians are the first people on earth to do a Bill of Rights. And that Bill of Rights included there can't be any more slavery and there can't be human sacrifice. And so she would have been contravening this totally sacred law that was so important to the Persians that they translated it into every language in the Persian Empire, so that she could show off, which is possible. It's totally possible, right? Like we can imagine leaders violating the Constitution. I'm not saying Next makes you really wonder. So, according to Herodotus, Xerxes has an affair on Amystress on the side. And the person that he has it with is the daughter of Otanes. Otanes was a super powerful noble in the Persian court who basically made Xerxes' dad the emperor. And so to punish the woman who sleeps with her husband, Amystress, according to Herodotus, goes into her mom, not the woman that cheated on Xerxes, or cheated with Xerxes on her, but the woman's mom, and hacks off her nose, eyelids, ears, lips, and I think she took her fingers too, just for grins and giggles. Well, okay, again, it's possible. People do cruel stuff. It's outrageous. Like, why would you do it and then to her? And then how did you get away with it? Like, you would think Otanes would have revolted or something. But it turns out that that story was actually an old Mesopotamian myth. And it was from, like 1,000 years earlier, or maybe even more. And so Herodotus is actually recycling this old story and then applying it to Amystress. And so right away, like anything he says, I feel like I have the right to question. Especially because it's really clear that Herodotus hated women, right? He's always portraying the women as sadistically evil. And it's also really clear that he had a thing against the Persians. Like to humiliate Xerxes, at one point he has Xerxes whip the Aegean Sea. So Xerxes orders the army with whips to go to the Aegean Sea and whip it. And that's just so comical that, it's hard to take serious. Like, really, did Xerxes do that? I wonder. And so one of the things I had to do is I had to balance. Is this good? Like, did Herodotus make this up or not? And then probably the reason Herodotus was doing all of this, so he was actually born in the city Artemisia was from, Halicarnassus. And he was actually probably about 5 years old when her reign came to an end. So and because he was from a rich family, it's entirely possible that at some point she held him, right? So there's this intimate connection that he had with Artemisia. Anyway, his cousin or uncle, we're not sure what the relationship is. This guy decides that he's going to be involved in a conspiracy to kill the king. The king happens to be Artemisia's grandson, Lycdamus II. And it fails. It fails miserably. The conspirators get captured. And so Herodotus decides he has to leave the city because he's no longer welcome because he's got this relative who just tried to off the king. And he flees to, of all places, Athens. And so Athens hates Persia. And so what's his job? He's an author. And he's writing for the Athenians and an Athenian audience. So automatically he's going to be predisposed to portraying the Persians as really awful, right? Because he wants to make his hosts happy. He's a refugee. But then to make things worse, Athens was also this shockingly misogynistic society. It wasn't all Greeks. Like the Spartans were shockingly egalitarian. But the Athenians were terrible. Women had no right to walk in public unless you were a prostitute. And there were the Athenians had 3 different levels of prostitute. There was basically slave prostitute, and then there was high-class prostitute. Pornai was the slave. That's where we get pornography from. I think pornai was, or maybe it was the middle one. And then hetero was the top form of prostitute. Or if you were poor, you were a woman, you could be in public. Or if it was a religious ceremony. Or if you were going to go fetch the water. In any case, you needed to wear a hijab and cover your face. Right? So the culture you're obsessed with hating, the Taliban or whoever you're focused on now, is actually very shockingly similar to the culture you think founded our civilization. The culture of Plato and Aristotle that didn't let women go into public. The prohibition on women going to public was so severe under the Athenians, you couldn't say a woman's name in public. It was taboo. And so here's Herodotus writing in Misogynist Central. Like I really recently ranked the misogyny level of every culture I could think of that I wanted to rank that I knew anything about. I didn't rank China because I don't know. And I had ancient Athens at the bottom. They got 0.5 on a 0 to 6. Taliban got 1.0. Anyway, so I think Herodotus sort of went out of his way to villainize the women, to portray them as super evil, and then portray the Persians as really bad, just to appeal to his Athenian audience. And maybe had he not been a refugee, he might have been a little more objective. So anyway, that was a really long answer there. Sorry. Yes?
Who ranked at the top?
Who ranked at the top? Okay, Iceland. I gave them a 5.5. And ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, women could be pharaohs. Women were directors of the colleges and the academies and the universities. The last director of the Great Library was Hypatia. When the Romans conquered Egypt, they banned women from owning property. And this drove, and they banned women from signing contracts, because the Romans were on 1.0, by the way. The Romans hated women having any form of power whatsoever. They weren't as bad as the Athenians, but they were bad. And so what the Egyptian women would do was they would just go buy a slave, and then they would take their male slave with them to all the contract signings, and they would have the slave sign. Because the ancient Egyptian women were not going to be crushed by the Romans. In ancient Egypt, women owned their sexuality, period. Not the dad, not the husband. So if a woman went out of marriage to have sex with somebody, tough. That was just, that belonged to her, which is like not our culture, right? In the United States, women don't own their sexuality. we make women change their names when they get married. You're like, we don't make them. Yeah, why is it 98%? Right? We make women change their names when they get married. And so talk about identity erasure. I would think having something on your head is a lot less identity erasing than changing your name. You know, like whenever we have this friend who sends us a card every Christmas and they write, Mr. and Mrs. Roy Casagranda. Like, talk about the identity erasure. And it pisses me off because it should be Dr. and Dr. Roy Casagranda. Who are these people? You know I had to twist that. I don't even know what the question was anymore. Did I answer it?
Why this particular slice of history? What is it that stood out to you that made you decide you had to write a book about it?
So actually, when I set out to write historical fiction, my goal from the very beginning was to correct errors in our perception of society. Like, for example, the over-worship of Athens, right? You know, like if you're going to worship somebody, do Sparta at least. But so that I was actually focused 1,000 years after this book set when I was doing my research, and I was working on doing stuff during the 6th century in Italy, the 6th century AD. So the Ostrogoths are there, but the Ostrogoths are slowly being beaten by the Roman Empire. And I know some of you were taught the Roman Empire fell in 476, but that's complete nonsense. It fell in 1453. So that was another thing I was trying to do, is have it, the Roman Empire existing after everybody thinks it fell. And as I was doing my research, I started noticing a little bit of a pattern, and that was that there were these women I kept running into that I had never heard of before. So like Irene of Athens, who was a Roman empress who actually ruled as an empress, which was, the Romans never did that. So you're like, who is this person? How'd she pull this off? And then I ran into Zenobia. So Zenobia, Rome got into serious, serious trouble in the 3rd century AD. It's actually shocking that Rome survived this trouble. And it actually broke up. It broke up into 3 states. And in the west, the northwest, Britain broke away, and it actually carved off a chunk of France, and they sort of created this new Gallica, as in Gaul, as in Celt, kingdom. But in the east, Zenobia, this woman, rises up, and she claims she was a descendant of Cleopatra VII, and it may actually be true. In any case, she rises up and she makes Palmyra her capital, and she carves Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and Turkey out of the Roman Empire. And the whole time she puts her son and the Roman emperor's face on the coin. She's actually minting coins and she's totally in charge. Like, the Roman emperor has nothing to do with anything. And like, who are these people? How come we've never heard of these people? Everybody's heard of Joan of Arc, and everybody's heard of Cleopatra. You don't know if she's the seventh, because you didn't know there were 6 other really badass Cleopatras. And then there's, and as I'm digging deeper, there's Berenica. There was actually 6 Berenicas, and Arsinoe. I think there were 3 Arsinoes, and I keep running into these women. And then finally I came across Artemisia, and I read her story, and I went, this has to be a novel, and this has to be a novel right now. And so I wrote it. And the story just unfolded in my head after I read about her. I don't know, should I tell you what she ended up achieving, or is that too much of a spoiler? It's too much of a spoiler, but she does something really remarkable that for a woman to pull off at a time when in Athens women can't walk into public and you can't say their name. Like, it's such a shocking contrast, but it's also part of the reason the Athenians hated her, right? Because she represented this potential dangerous threat that women could do. And then she pulls it off within the confines of the Persian Empire. So that was another thing I really liked about it, was I could actually tell it. So Artemisia was 3/4 Greek and 1/4 Carian. The Carians were the indigenous people living in the southwest corner of Turkey. So I could tell it from this person who was Greek, so then it would be familiar to you because you think Western civilization, but from within Persia, which you're used to villainizing, right? In our movies, we portray Persians as 9-foot-tall gay black men. Because everybody knows there is nothing more evil than a tall gay black man, right? I mean, so it's unbelievable. Oh my God, he's so tall, which automatically makes him so evil. And what the irony is Iran means Aryan. Like the country named Aryan, and to make them evil, it's insane, really, when you think about it. So that was another thing that was really interesting about Artemisia, was she forces you as a reader to re-examine your prejudices you might have about Persia. She forces you to re-examine what women are capable of too. She was the first woman to lead Greeks. It had never been done before. Even though it's in their myth system, right? They have these really powerful Artemis and Athena. They have these really powerful gods. They just didn't actually let women do this.
I just wanted to know if you had any more like gruesome ancient surgery anecdotes.
Oh, gruesome ancient surgery anecdotes. The first thing that popped in my head wasn't ancient, but medieval, and it wasn't really gruesome. Ibn Sina, the founder of modern medicine, did cataract surgery.
Awesome.
He wrote his book, The Canon of Medicine, in 1025 AD. So it was literally 1,000 years ago they were doing cataract surgery. In Persia. He was a Persian philosopher. He was Muslim too. So, considering that Muslims are 1% of the US population, but 15% of our MDs, it totally fits. Totally fits.
So you said you kept running into these different women who had sort of climbed into roles of power or become very powerful. Was there any sort of pattern to like how they managed to do this under these conditions where, so many women could not have achieved any of these things? What did they seem to do consistently to kind of rise up?
So very frequently it was they married the right guy and then he died. And that put them in a position where they could leverage it, right? They're like, oh.
Wait, did he die?
So that's a real question. So Hatshepsut, the pharaoh, the woman pharaoh, it's likely Tutmosis II just died, that she didn't poison him, but it's very likely that her stepson Tutmosis III did poison her. He was furious that she wouldn't give up the crown and let him rule, because he felt like, I'm the heir, I'm the man. So very frequently, it was a woman in the right place, like in the case of Hatshepsut. Her husband dies, but here's the thing, she could have easily just stepped aside and become a regent for Tutmosis III. And she chose not to. She said, you know what, I'm doing this. This is mine, I'm the ruler. In her case, she actually portrayed herself regularly as a man, which was sort of a weird twist. Because there had been, prior to her, there had been women who ruled Egypt, and after her, there were women who ruled Egypt and they didn't portray themselves as a man. But then when she would portray the god Hathor, the goddess of motherhood, she would put her face. So she clearly had like the inclination, like, I don't want to always be a guy in public. But she would even wear the false beard in her statues. Like, she really went all to that extreme. Interestingly enough, her stepson, Thutmose III, goes down in history as the greatest military leader ever. And so, even though she really did a lot to eclipse this guy in the beginning, once he offed her, he got his glory. Like, he was in great shape. The case of Zenobia, her husband died and then she leveraged that. So frequently that was the case. My list includes, though, 16 philosophers. And in the case of the philosophers, they achieved because they were just brilliant. There are 16 ancient philosophers that you've never heard of. And by the way, I've only just started researching them, so don't ask me anything about them. One of the things, actually, I have a work study, and she's working on helping me compile this stuff. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how much of the writing from that time period is still around. Because, you know, that's one of the tragedies of the burning of the Great Library, is when that Christian mob set that place on fire, we lost a lot of texts that we will never be able to read. I don't want to make it all sound like it was marriage, but yeah, that's usually the case. Right place, right time. The guy dies.
As far as like naming conventions, you said there were 7 Cleopatras and like there's 8 King Henry VIII. Did they were born with that name, or did they like take on that name?
So what happened with the Ptolemaic dynasty, which is frequently not called the 31st dynasty of Egypt, but it's totally the 31st dynasty of Egypt. Frequently what happened with that dynasty was that, so the ancient Egyptians set the Macedonians up for a little bit of a disaster. When the ancient Egyptians would marry pharaohs to a queen, they would say, and his sister. So for years we thought the ancient Egyptians were just marrying into the same family. But one of the things we noticed was they weren't having, because we have their mummies, they weren't having the same problems that European royalty was having, right? So why weren't they? And then what we realized is it wasn't actually the dude's sister. Now there are exceptions to this, like Ramses II, but I don't want to talk about him. Because that was just bad. He didn't just marry his sisters. Anyway, so what it was is that symbolically, because they wanted to show, Pharaoh means big house, which has no bearing on my identity at all. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to show that they were now bound together in a single family. And so symbolically, she got adopted into the family. We've only figured this out recently. So for years we were like, oh my God, what an incestuous bunch. Well, the Macedonians didn't know either. So the Macedonians conquer Egypt and they're like, well, I guess this is how they do it here. And they start marrying their sisters. And they're marrying, and they just go way too far. But for whatever reason, they decided they just had one name for the boys, and it was Ptolemy. And then for the girls, they had 3 names, Arsinoe, Berenica, and Cleopatra. And all the women were named one of those 3 names, and all the boys were, to the point where there were sometimes brothers who were both Ptolemy. And you're like, why are you doing this? Surely you could find another name from time to time. So there were, I'm trying to remember what the final number was. I think there was 13 Ptolemy who were pharaoh, but there were like 16 famous Ptolemies, like 16 Ptolemies that made it into history. I shouldn't say famous. Anyway, and they were all super inbred. Cleopatra, I figured it out at one point. I took her back like 5 generations. So 5 generations, you should have 2 to the 5th power. What is that? 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. You should have 32 relatives, right? In that. And she had 1. 4 were Greek and 1 was Persian. So that was bad. That was a mistake. You should. Anyway, I don't know if I answered your question. I'm not letting you leave until you ask me another question. What time is it? How are we doing for time? I was told that I have to let you leave sometime.
7:55.
Okay.
What do you see as the future of this story? Because I know you had mentioned that you might want to do a prequel and then maybe come back and do a sequel to this one.
So there's even more fun material because there's an Artemisia II, and there's a leader in between Artemisia I and Artemisia II called Tissaphernes that I really like. I can totally see potentially, I don't know, writing about them. I do have ideas for a prequel, but I don't want to talk about it. Yeah, I mean, but I'm not dedicated to the idea that I would stick with this. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I found that when I start writing, I don't really have any control over it. It just takes me to where I want to go. Like, if you had asked me 10 years ago if I was going to write this book, I would have been no. But partly because I didn't know who she was. If I had known who she was 10 years ago, maybe I would. I don't really know. I didn't see myself as writing historical fiction. Like, I thought, sci-fi, spaceships. But I got stuck on something. So, okay, this is what I'm really messed up on this. But someday some physicists will straighten me out. So, if you're going faster, time is traveling for you slower, right? So your goal then in combat would be to slow down, because if you're experiencing 10 hours for that guy's 1 minute, that's 10 hours worth of laser shots you could have fired at the other guy.
Those lasers are traveling the speed of light, though.
Right, but still, that's a lot of laser shots that guy is going to have to dodge, because he's experiencing them at the speed of light, right? It's not like they're slowing down for him just because you had 10 extra hours. But here's the thing. So if I'm heading towards somebody and they're heading towards me, to slow down, I'm going to fire my boosters forward, right? So now I'm slowing down. But really what I'm doing is I'm just actually traveling backwards. So I don't know how relative to another guy I can actually slow down. And so this ruined it for me. I was like, screw sci-fi, this can't be done. Space combat can't be done. It's not.
How did you even get there? What were you thinking before that?
I wanted a realistic space battle, not Star Trek or Star Wars. They're terrible. Star Trek's better.
I think you found what black hole is. Space-time is just, that's how they...
That's it. And that put me off, so I decided to write historical fiction. It was easier.
I see HBO picking this up, like, you know.
Do you have contact with them?
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks.
Will you turn this into a musical, though?
Yeah, that would be great.
Oh, man. You just need a lyricist.
I do. Because it can't be me. Roland, did you have a question?
Well, I was just wondering, given that the premise that you're working from is that history is so subverted and jaded because it's always written from either the patriarchy's point of view or the winner's point of view. And we actually have women in this country who seem to be okay with this. What do you think is going to happen 100 years from now when somebody looks at the Texas State Board of Education and, you know, their decision to take, I don't know, Helen Keller out or Hillary Clinton? What's your thoughts?
I mean, so I was thinking about this the other day. I was reflecting on how 1984-ish we've gotten. Because it's not just the United States, Russia, Poland, Hungary, China. China now, they have this really cool thing where every time you do anything ever, like you go online and you buy diapers, they mark it, you get points because you're a good parent. You spend too much time playing a video game, you lose points because you're slacking off. You're not like, oh my God. So everything you do, like somebody's keeping track of it. Anyway, and I thought, wow, this is way worse than 1984. Like 1984 feels like Orwell was not, he was kind to us. So I think at some level, the level of double think, double speak that we've accepted. You know, like, we're just going to write people out of history. Oh my God, that's what he was doing in 1984, right? They were burning the news articles from the past to get rid of them. What we did in the United States, though, that was more clever than getting rid of the words in the dictionary, was we promoted thesauruses in the schools so that you would conflate the words, so you wouldn't know that each word had its own very precise meaning, and you would think that 15 words had the exact same meaning, and in the process you'd wipe out 14 concepts, right? And oh well, I thought we would get rid of the words, and sure enough we did, but we did it in this really roundabout way by giving you a poetry class, and then you're sitting there like going through and trying to pick the word that rhymed, not realizing that that word didn't mean the other word. And the problem with that, of course, is it's really dumbed down our ability to talk to each other because we lost all these concepts. So losing historical figures is bad, but losing the concepts is worse. I think at some point in the United States we made the decision to, because at one point we thought if we have really good schools, we can produce scientists and thinkers and we can rule the world with technology. But at some point we decided, yeah, but dumb people are really good at we're really good at manipulating those to get them to go buy garbage they don't need that's worth less than what they're being charged, and to vote for people they shouldn't be voting for. And the systematic dumbing down of schools in the United States is just something that drives me bonkers. We're doing what Herodotus did in effect, but like nothing has been changed, nothing is learned. They got rid of Jefferson, was that 2011? Or maybe it was 2009? How do you get rid of Jefferson? And then some dude wrote the Declaration of Independence and was the third president, but we don't know who he was. You know, like, how did we get here? And then, but here's the question, why aren't we protesting in the streets?
We are.
Yeah, now. There was the 60s, and then now. What happened in the meantime? I mean, don't get me wrong, I was there in 2003 getting arrested, protesting the war, and I did go to Occupy, and I was running the teach-ins at Occupy, but this isn't going to work unless it's a sustained movement. Like, why aren't people working consistently, constantly in the streets? There are some people in this room who do, but the vast majority of people, they just come and they go. Like when the Women's March happened in January last year, I was like, oh my God. And then nothing? That was it? That's all you had? That was incredible. That blew my mind. But that was it? And then, we had a protest here. There are arrestees in this room for when Kavanaugh got through. But that doesn't mean anything unless we sustain it. There has to be more. You have to keep doing this. This isn't a one-time thing. Voting in November is great. If you don't vote, you're an idiot. But then you can't stop there. Like, you can't just go, okay, I did my duty, I'll come back in 2 years.
Thank you.
It needs to be every day for the 2 years where you're active, and then you vote. The voting should be an aside almost, but you do have to, especially in an election like this. Right, anyway, I think I've exhausted. Now we've gotten into politics. You got me talking about
I was going to say, I think actually the reminder to vote is probably a really great place to stop. If you guys have other questions that you want to ask Roy, meet him over here at the table where you can buy a copy of his book, and I'm sure if you ask nicely, he'd be happy to sign it for you.